Thank you. I wanted to ask about one of my staff members received the letter from OPM, and as I understand it, in the letter, she was asked by a third-party contractor to produce information on her credit card and bank accounts, and she was also not told about the IRS's IP PIN program, which we've spent some time on in this committee, which allows taxpayers who are victims of identity theft or potential victims to protect themselves. So I was kind of troubled when I learned that this morning from her, just because here we have a situation where all of these records have been breached, and if our solution is to ask people to submit additional very personal information on credit card, bank records that you would then, either you or your third-party contractor would be holding, rather than working with potential victims of this to, have them seek the proper mechanism with the credit reporting agencies. So can you help me understand this and why you think this is a good approach? Because let's face it, the fact that we are where we are with all these records that have now been breached, I don't think people should feel real confident at the moment of giving you additional information or a contractor working with the government on this.
To my knowledge, Senator, we're not asking, and so I'd like to talk to your we're not asking for that information, so I would like to talk to your staff member to find out exactly what conversation or what information she got, because the registration for the credit monitoring is an action that each individual takes. So I'd be glad to talk to her.
That would be great. I hope she's not already being, her information identity thieves already trying to manipulate this, because when she told me that this morning, my jaw dropped. And so I want to understand why OPM isn't using encryption, or what steps are being taken to better use encryption of people's information, given the breadth of personal information that OPM is maintaining on so many of the people in this country?
Certainly. I wish that our systems, all of our systems, were able to be fitted with the encryption tools, but we have an older legacy system, and there are certain applications that it would not. We would not be able to use encryption, and as Dr. Osment will say, that the encryption in fact, would not have prevented this incident. That's an important fact, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't move forward to indeed apply encryption wherever we can, and we're moving forward with that, as well as using more modern tools such as masking and the hiding of redacting of information when it's not needed.
Well, does encryption is one tool in the toolbox, and does OPM employ a layered approach at all? Because obviously layering is something that is important when you're looking at making sure that there are different ways that information is protected as a multi-verification process versus relying on one tool in the toolbox.
Right. I would have to get back with you, Senator, to be sure that I can give you that full information.
Well, that would be very important, I think, because to me, the fact that many of the tools that seem to be lacking in the use here are already being engaged in the private sector, yet the type of personal information that is being held by an agency like OPM is just staggering in terms of what we're hearing about the breadth of this breach. So I would like a follow-up on that question. One thing that I want to understand is that in January, OPM began utilizing this two-factor authentication approach, and incidentally and unknowingly ended the intrusion into the data system containing security and clearance information. Do you believe that had this been in place to begin with, the intrusion would not have been able to happen in the first place?
I would have to ask Dr. Osmond more on the forensic side for that, but I know that we have moved very rapidly to increase the percentage of unprivileged users with two-factor authentication. We're also, for remote users, have 100%. I'm sorry. We have requiring two-factor authentication for all remote users.
And one of the things that I had asked you about with my staff member when I told you the information she had received, and touched upon in the beginning, was something we heard a lot of testimony in this committee on from the IRS commissioner, because unfortunately the IRS has been breached as well, and they have this IRS IP PIN program. It strikes me that given the type of information that has been breached in this, that the victims of this theft can very much expect that they could likely be victims of tax fraud going forward. So what steps are you taking to ensure that these victims have access and are enrolled in the IRS IP PIN program to ensure that we aren't having another hearing on, I suppose, potentially millions of individuals who now find themselves to be victims of tax fraud as well?
I'll ask my colleague Tony Scott to talk about that. I'm not familiar with the IRS.
Yeah, the PIN program is actually designed to do a different thing, as I understand it, than would be the use case for OPM. But I can answer some of the question that you asked the director. They do have a multi-layered approach.
But Tony, excuse me, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Mr. Scott. But let me just say, what the IRS, what I'm trying to say is this, is that we know all this personal information has been breached. People are going to be, that are the victims of this, will be filing their tax returns. If they are enrolled in the IRS PIN program, people can't just file the tax return. They are then given a PIN at their physical address, so therefore the identity thieves can't then use this information to then victimize them on the IRS end. And this would be something, if I were a victim of this, that I would want to have put in place right away, because this could protect me from potential tax fraud because of the extra step that has to be taken. So how are we working this with the IRS to make sure these victims have access to this program? Because this is a very large problem right now.
Sure. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question initially. So we will look at this cross-agency, not just at the IRS, but anywhere else citizens need to interact with the federal government as part of our longer-term recommendation.
So forgive me, my time is up, but I think looking at it is probably insufficient given how devastating this type of use of people's personal information can be. And I think that we can't just look at it. I think we've got to come up with a plan to give the people who have been victimized the opportunity to be part of this program, so they then aren't further victimized by becoming victims of tax fraud. Thank you.